right, sorry about the delay, just having some computer issues. So we'll get started here in just a minute or two. So we'll just make sure everyone can hear, okay? And all right, so we'll get started here. Apologize for the delays. My computer decided to not cooperate for a minute there. So just want to make sure that you can, if you could just send a quick comment just to make sure that you can hear the audio. And I know a lot of people have introduced themselves already, so we'll get started here. And okay, so it looks like the audio's all right. So we had some questions from the last Hangouts. Yes, I'm seeing a couple comments of 2 Hangouts in 3 days. So we figured there's a lot of people who have some time. That have more free time and are experimenting with their Cubase. So we're just trying to get people up to speed. So let's go through some of the questions. And we had questions from last time that we'll try to get to as well that we didn't answer. So appreciate everyone's patience in getting started. Sorry, we got a little bit of a late start. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start. So we have... let's see, part 1. In the MIDI edit window, I record a played keyboard chord pattern, just lately selecting a bunch of MIDI notes, i.e. a chord, and moving them forward or backwards has got a lot more fiddly. So let's take a look at some of the MIDI capabilities here. And for those who don't know, my name is Greg Ondo, and I'm be broadcasting from Northern Virginia in USA. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. So let's go ahead and take a quick look. I'll add just a quick instrument track here, and I'll just go ahead and draw some chords in. And as we do this, we'll look at it in our MIDI editor. So my lovely patch there. All right, let's see if I can find something a little more. Okay, so it says like played a keyboard pattern, just lightly selecting a bunch of MIDI notes in a chord and moving them forward or backwards has gotten a lot more fiddly. So I'm not sure what fiddly would mean. One thing to be aware of as you do this, that it could be that you have snap turned on. Make sure you don't have snap turned on, and you could turn that on and off in the editor just by hitting the letter J, and you could turn this on in this particular icon. If it seems more kind of like a graphical type of situation, you could select a number of chords, but that all has seemed to work pretty well for me. It could be also, if it seems like more of a graphical thing, then you may want to investigate like your video driver and see if that makes a difference at all, but it seems to kind of function as expected here. Okay, and we have part 2 says, okay, so it says part 2 of the question. So I highlight a bunch of notes and click and hold them to drag them forward or backwards, but the notes keep deselecting themselves. One thing that it could be perhaps, and this could be, so if you find that the notes are deselecting themselves, check a preference. There's a preference, I believe it's under editing, and check the status of this particular preference where you could auto select events under cursor. See, and this could also be why this could be related to your part 1 question about the select the event. So that could select the events that fall under the cursor unknowingly if that's checked. So it sounds like it could be one of those preferences here. I would check the auto select events under cursor to see if that makes a difference for you. Okay, so part 3 of the question, I have to change the vertical widths to make what used to be an easy workflow. Now this has greatly slowed my workflow. Is it just me, or is anyone else having this problem in Cubase 10.5 and Windows 10? So let me just... So maybe this is kind of related to the part 2 of changing the vertical widths. So you may want to, again, just kind of check that preference. So I'm not sure if that was making a difference. This was a question that we had. It was kind of a leftover question from the Hangout on Tuesday. But what we wanted people to do is people had asked how to see the actual note that's on the note name on the notes in the key editor, and it's really dependent upon the zoom level of the vertical zoom. So as you kind of zoom in and out further, you could see that the note names will appear at a certain resolution. So it's just one of the carryover questions we had from earlier. So, all right, so we'll go through some more of the questions and we'll circle back and get questions that were from the last Hangout. All right, so we see... it says, what is the main goal of doing a Google Hangout? Is a question from Ecuador. So the main goal is really just kind of teach people how to use their Cubase and Steinberg software better. So you could answer, we'll try to go through, answer any tips and show you tips and tricks for questions that you might have. Okay, so let's go through some of the questions, and thanks for everyone for introducing themselves. Sorry I got started a little bit late. Computer wasn't cooperating. Okay, let's see. And I'm seeing some people mentioning perhaps it's a Logitech mouse. Someone had asked that and to see if that was a problem. So maybe if someone who's had experience with Logitech mice, if they've had issues, I'm using one currently, and I tend not to have any problems with them. Okay, so we see people from Nashville checking in, Dallas, Finland, Sweden. Okay, so we have Las Vegas. All right, Brazil. All right, and again, if you have questions, just enter it in the comments field. Okay, so we have a question. Does anybody have a problem with the eLicense dongle? Since I upgraded to 10.5, my dongle has been acting up. Sometimes it could depend on what generation. If you have, a dongle from SX1 or SX2, it may, there's been some advancements in the eLicenser technology. So it could be, I find it. I've used like the dongle I'm using today, the eLicenser, I've had since SX1, and I'm still using the same one. It's kind of traveled with me throughout the whole world. And, but sometimes, I've seen people run into situations where getting a newer eLicenser, they tend to be a little faster and they can be a little more reliable. And if you got a blank eLicenser from a dealer, they're like $30-$35 US. I'm not sure what they are worldwide, but roughly you could just simply transfer your licenses, and that could speed things up. So I know some people do that, and it's kind of solved some issues. Just that their eLicenser is getting a little old and perhaps slow, and the newer eLicensers hold more licenses, have more memory. All right, so we'll keep going here. Thanks for everyone's patience again. Okay, so we have Phoenix, Buenos Aires, Sweden, Germany. Okay, is there a way to control the outputs of the VSTI to render to mono or stereo? So when we do this, let's say if we have a VSTI, so maybe we'll just do a quick new project here. So as soon as we'll start with maybe like a Groove Agent track here. Okay, so what you could do if you wanted to, for rendering between mono and stereo, let me just load a quick kit here. Okay, I'll just load a kit with patterns really quickly. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you need to kind of work and be able to render, mono to stereo, one of the things that you could do is further assign it, and could be a little convoluted because, usually by default, most of the plugins will work in stereo, but sometimes like a kick or a snare, you may want to be able to route that to mono. So if you wanted to come here, we could say we're going to assign these to different outputs. So we could say, I wanted to have my kick going out of output 2, my snare out of output 3, let's say my hi-hats out of output 4, and let's just do, our cymbals out of output 5, and output 6 and 7 for room and overhead. So as we would kind of play this back, this particular pattern, and we look at it in our mix console, and let me just hide our input channels here. So what we want to do is we can see that these will be kind of summed. So we could add, if I wanted to at this point, add some different buses. What you could do now is route these particular channels to a combination of mono or stereo groups. So let's say if I wanted to add different mono groups, so I could right click here, and we're going to use our we'll add group tracks. So I'll just add 3 mono groups, and we'll assign those to the stereo out. And let's add 2 stereo groups. Okay, well, we have 1 there. So what we want to do now is to say we're going to take our kicks here, and at this point I could select, my different outputs of these particular tracks, and I will, let's go ahead and just make sure as we do this, so as we have our different outputs here, I want to make sure we have our outputs enabled in the VST instrument here. So we'll click on VSTi. Okay, so we have those turned on, and I'll just go to my full screen mixer. This will be a little easier for routing. Okay, so now we could just send these particular outputs here to our groups. And let's say I just wanted my cymbals and room all going to my stereo group. And now if you wanted to render as we would just kind of play back the audio, you could also set up different tracks. So let's add 3 mono tracks. And if I did everything correctly here, so I'll add these, and then we could actually just set these to group 1 in our inputs, we could just route it to our groups. And then at this point, we could, as we would hit play, we could record these particular signals directly into our stream. So we'll go back to our Groove Agent, and as we would play back, so now you could just record those and print those as mono tracks. So you could have just the kick and snare. So what you could do again is just kind of route it to either a mono or to a stereo group from here, and you have 16 or 32 stereo outputs in Groove Agent to work with. And then you could choose to do an export audio mixdown, or just come over here and if you wanted to just re-record back in. So you could do mono and stereo, and you could do that for working with, if you want to have a bass that's in mono, you could do that as well. So, and as you do a render in place or just do a live print back, you could just have that automatically work. All right, so let's go through some of the questions. Thanks for your patience with everyone's getting started a little late. Apologize for that. You may hear some noises. My son is home from school. School's closed, so he may invade in a little bit. So just a little forewarning. Okay, so let's go ahead and okay, so we had a question on the Cubase MIDI device panel. So the question is, can we control multiple MIDI page parameters using the Cubase MIDI device panel? For example, I want to control my access virus TI page B parameter. Let's see, page B parameter B6, which is the ARP swing. So you could kind of come over here and I'll probably do this incorrectly, but if we come to your studio setup, you could go to your, not under studio setup, but so let's go under more devices under the studio menu, and you could go to the MIDI device manager. And at this point, you could, let's say we want to install a device, and we could just start with something, let's say like a JV 1080 or something like that. You tell it where it's connected to in your audio interface. Now you could choose to open your device, and you could add panels. And these panels could really be, if I wanted to be general size, you could also have these panels in the inspector area or for channel strip. So let's just say a general size panel. And now we could choose, we could kind of build your own editor. And each of these editors can be, if you wanted to edit the panel function that you want to do, we could, add panels. And these could be, different types of sysx messages that you're working with or MIDI CC messages. So you could build kind of your own software editor. And that could be kind of any parameters that you wanted to do. And these could be responsive to different MIDI inputs and output different channels. So you could kind of build your own patterns. So I think you should be able to set up your different parameters in your virus to do that. All right, so we have someone from Canada checking in. Okay, so we had a question about more control room tips, please, especially for 7.1 surround. Cubase, which is what we're in now, only does 5.1, but we'll show you some of the concepts which will be applicable if you need to do 7.1 or beyond. That's what Nuendo would do. So let's go ahead and show you what we could do. So when you're working with surround, there's a lot of different options that can be set up. And one of the ones that's very handy is when you go to the audio connections, Um, I will come over here, and how I have it set up and have my studio designed was I have a stereo monitoring system as my main. And then I have a 5.1 set up, and I use kind of an alternate stereo from my 5.1 and a mono from my 5.1 to do mixing. So in our control room, and we set the control room in our VST or audio connections under the studio menu. So you want to have the outputs defined. I'll just do a new project here. And let's say we have a number of different tracks. So I want these to go first. We need to make sure that we have, if we're working in 5.1 or surround, that we, in our audio connections in the outputs, we may want to actually define a 5.1 bus. And here we could see, and I don't have multiple inputs and outputs necessarily in my audio interface I'm using, but you have a left, right, a center, LFE, left surround, right surround. If you're in 7.1 in Nuendo, you would have side fills, or if you're doing Dolby Atmos, you could have also different areas for, your height speakers. So we're going to have that configured. So we have a 5.1 output. Now, we don't necessarily want these to be physically connected. So when I go to add tracks, we could route these to my 5.1, and let's just say I have 16 tracks. So now as soon as we have those set up, we could double click and we will get a surround panner. So our surround panner, we could, position stuff within our 3D field. So it could be more in the rear speakers, left speakers. You also have controls for, if you wanted to just adjust the front center, how much is in the center channel, front, how much will be, being sent to the LFE. So you could have, a number of different, options here for your panning. Now in your control room, what you want to do is just go to your audio connections. And since we have a 5.1 set up, you probably want to come over here. And I find that sometimes, and I haven't tried this in a little bit, but I remember other versions, it makes sense to have your 5.1 as your first monitor source, as kind of your primary monitor source. So we could right click here and we're going to add a monitor. And these monitors could be configured, whatever. So we'll just say this is my 5.1 Yamaha setup. So we'll have that configured. And what I want to do is here, and if I don't do that, if I don't make a mistake, so I'll remove that again. So I want to add my monitor source, and we'll just call this our Yamaha. And I want the configuration to be 5.1. So now that I have this is where I want to make the connections for what output of my audio interface is being sent to my left speaker, my right speaker, center, LFE or sub, and your surround speakers. So once we have this configured and we're in the control room, there's some very handy things that we could do. One is you'll have different down mix settings. So it may be a good idea to make sure that the mixes that you're doing actually translate to stereo, which a lot of people will be listening to on their laptops maybe, or mono, so people listening to it on their phones or iPads that you could monitor through different sources, and this will do different down mix presets. When we go to our monitor section here, we could switch between different monitors if you wanted to as well. So, and that comes in, very handy for, doing some of those different functions. Now, when we go to our channels, we could also have some functions here where you say, I just want to solo only the left and right speakers in this mix, or what is going on with just the fronts, or I wanted to go to just listen to what's going on in the surround. I wanted to listen to just, you could just come over here and say we want to on the center channel, and we could also listen to the surround channels in the front. So I know a lot of people that may have kind of a dual orientation in their system, and they may be mixing here in kind of like an audio engineer mode, and the other side may be like MIDI sequencing mode where they have speakers here, like maybe a control surface here, they turn around, and this is their MIDI suite, and they just want to switch between the left and right speakers. So these different channel settings also give you some really handy control for being able to, if you're doing critical listening to a crossfade that's going on in the back and you just wanted to flip that to your front speakers instead, just to make editing a little easier. So those different things. And the handy thing is once we have this set up as a 5.1, you have the capability of having one single volume knob that will adjust the volume of all 6 speakers. So it's one knob here, so you're not having to go through a mix console that's really designed for stereo monitoring and stereo routing and turn down 3 channels or more. So even though Cubase doesn't do 7.1, you could do a tremendous amount with the 5.1. All right, so we'll scroll down to the next question. All right. Okay. So, all right, so let's go scrolling through comments. So we have a question about please show how to properly set up a Talkback mic. This is also done in the control room. So, and the Talkback mic is really designed, like if you have people in like a different room and you want to be able to communicate with them, kind of like your Talkback mic would be in a console. So if we go to your studio menu to audio connections, and we're going to click on the control room tab, we want to add a Talkback mic. And here we're just going to have a microphone that's connected into an audio input on our audio interface. So let's say, okay, here I want to connect it into input 1 of my UR24C. Now, at this point, if we have, let's say, different cue mixes, so let's say I want to give a cue mix to drums, and we'll give them a stereo cue mix, and I want to add, let's say, for guitar, and we can add in our cue mix for bass. Okay, so once we have these different cue mixes, we see our cue mixes here. Now, the Talkback we could engage just by hitting this button. So as soon as we hit this, the Talkback is engaged, and you could start communicating directly with the artist. Now, you can pick and choose when we go to our different cue mixes, and we could just kind of hold down I'm holding down Control or Command. So let's say if I was tracking drums, guitar, and bass, and let's say the bass player just messed up, and so right now we see this green light. When this green light is enabled and Talkback is turned on, we could just simply, say, okay, I could now communicate to all 3 of the people. And if I want to say, hey, that was a great take, and drummer, hey drummer, can you give the bass player a visual cue? He keeps missing that, and without the bass player hearing that comment, and you could just come right over here and enable communication to the different headphone mixes that have been configured. So you could have your Talkback mic set up to do that, so you could communicate, if you're and people are in different rooms or they want different headphone mixes, you could communicate with them. So that's what kind of the Talkback mic allows you to do. And again, that's configured in the studio. So we go to your audio connections into control room. You right click to add a Talkback mic, and then that's just using an input, and then turn it on here. One of the things that I have set up is just a generic remote control to, like, when I hit a foot switch, like a sustain pedal, and I have this configured with my CC121, where I hit the sustain pedal, that turns on the Talkback mic. So I could be doing all my editing, naming tracks, and hit the sustain pedal, and that opens up the Talkback communication to the performers. So it's a really handy function in the control room. So you know, take advantage of the Talkback mic. Okay, so we'll go through some more questions. All right, thanks for all the great questions, and sorry again for starting a little late. So appreciate everyone's great questions. All right, so people, Canada. Okay. Okay, so we have a question, how to add real-time effect like reverb while recording a vocal track. So, you know, one of the things that you could do, depending on your audio interface, they could be set up a bit differently. So if I have like a UR interface, and let's say I'll just kind of go to my stereo out here, and I have this configured. So I have like a UR24C, and if you have the inputs connected, let's go to my audio connections here. Let's say I want that connected for my inputs. And now, you know, we could have this. So you can have, you know, different interfaces will have the ability of, you know, having built-in audio, built-in DSP. So the UR, the RT2, the UR22C, you know, the UR242 and higher, basically everything except the original UR22 and UR22 Mark II can have built-in audio capabilities. So as soon as I come over here, you could now be able to route to those inputs. Now, if you are using other tracks, you could just simply come here and have a send effect. And then we could just kind of right click into sends. And if you want to add a reverb send, we could just say, let's just add a little bit of reverb. And as we do this, as the singer is singing, it'll get processed through the reverb. So sometimes this can add the unwanted latency, and unfortunately, it's just kind of physics that allows you to do that. So, but you could monitor through this. Now, if you don't hear the effects as you're doing this, it could be that that you have to be in. So if you go to your studio setup under the studio menu, we could choose to, when you go to the VST audio system and we select your audio interface, you want to make sure that direct monitoring, unless your audio interface is designed to have DSP through direct monitoring like the URs, that if you have direct monitoring checked, which seems to make sense, that basically passes the input directly to the output without kind of going through the Cubase engine. And that's kind of what a lot of people use for tracking, which seems to make sense until you actually the singer wants to hear reverb. So as soon as you come here, if you have the reverb set up and you're not hearing it, make sure that you have direct monitoring turn on if you don't have an interface like the UR series that will automatically have the reverb. So you could just simply have, you know, an insert. And again, when you do this could have some latency latency and it may throw off the singer. So just kind of beware of that. So if you have the plugin on and you're not hearing it, you know, with most interfaces, make sure that you have direct monitoring not checked. Okay, we'll go through some of the other questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so it says, trying this question again, after tempo detect, how do you change the first few bars or even delete them without affecting the rest of the tempo track of the song? Thank you. All right, so let's give it a try here. I think if we do like the range tool, so let me just close this project. Okay, I'll import a quick audio file and we'll do a tempo detection on it. Okay, so I will select a file and we'll go to our project and choose tempo detection. And this will automatically do an analysis of the file and get rid of it. All right, so let's say, I think the question was, maybe when editing, that if we delete, let's say if I delete something, let me just reread the question, make sure I have it correct. Okay, so let's say, how do you change the first few bars or even delete them without accidentally deleting the rest of the tempo detection of the song? So let's say if I wanted to, I'll undo that edit. So let's say if I grab the range tool, and you could, let me get the right keyboard shortcut here. So once we have our range tool selected, okay, so if you hold down Control Shift or Command Shift, and if I wanted to get rid of the particular range and all the tempo, if I do this, this would be a global selection. So we could kind of do range selection on particular tracks like this, but if you want to do it globally, hold down Command plus Shift using the range tool. And now if I just come here and let's say we go to edit to range, and I just say, let's just delete the time. That will move the tempo and the information simultaneously. So perhaps try using the range tool and make sure that you delete all of the material as opposed to just the audio file itself. And I think there's also, like, if you come here, there's also, so if you select the range, try using that. And I think that will kind of do the trick for you. All right, so we'll move on to some other questions here. Okay, sorry, my mouse scrolled along here a little farther. Okay, thanks for, again, different questions. Okay, so question. Okay, so we have a question. Why is the studio room, I assume this is the control room, mono button not working, not playing in mono, just stereo? So let's give it a quick try. So let's say I have a stereo track here. And this is one of the things that you can do in a control room, is different down mix presets. So it will still play back into two channels, but not necessarily in stereo. Let's just jump ahead here. We have a little bit of delay and reverb. So even though it's mono, it can still send a mono signal out of the two channels. I'll try it on another track as well, see if we can have it a little more obvious. We'll give it a shot. I'll open up another project. So just open this up. Thanks again for all wonderful questions. And this may be a little more obviously in stereo. We'll see if we can hear more of a difference. Let me just remove my 5.1 bus. And I'll add a monitor here. All right. So here you could definitely hear like the mono. So that seems to be, it will output to 2 channels, but still a mono signal. That's where everything's kind of panned. There's no panning really. So it could be outputting the mono signal to 2 different channels, and it's a great way to, I know many engineers that will mix in mono kind of throughout the whole process until like the last 5% and then start working with stereo stuff. But that seems to be working pretty obviously here. Here the whole stereo field collapse. Especially when everything kind of kicks in here. Okay, so we had a question on track import feature coming in Nuendo as well. That allows to import all types of tracks. I think pretty much all the features that we see in Cubase 10.5 will be migrating to Nuendo as well, and there will be, usually when we do that, people sometimes accuse us of, beta testing Nuendo on Cubase users, but, as we do Nuendo stuff, there's other stuff that's implemented as well. So it just takes a little bit longer. So I think we'll see the same track import capabilities coming to next version of Nuendo when that's out. Okay, so we have a question. I want to import a full audio track for referencing. How do I monitor it? And also, how do I give my session to use the BPM of the reference moving forward? Okay, so if we have a particular audio track that we wanted to have as a reference, let me see. I think I may have a setup, project that's kind of set up for this, and this is a very powerful thing to do, and we could do this using the control room as well. So let me just see if I have this particular project. I think I should, from my friend Clay Ostwald. Okay. So, and this is a very powerful function of using a reference track as a mix. So, we could just simply take and this is a question because the problem is a lot of people will load up a reference track, and as soon as they go to, they have plugins in their Master Effects chain that if they just import an audio file, that it goes through the Master Effects without, you're taking kind of a master track through your Master Effects plugin, and it's really kind of a reference that's lying to you. So I will just kind of come over here. Let me make sure I have all my tracks visible. Okay, so let's say I have a project here, and I think I have a stereo mix down. Go all the way to the bottom. So here's a stereo mix down. So let's say I will just kind of take this track, and let's say if I did some really horrible EQ on it. So let's say that is my reference track. So right now I have this kind of muted, and I could hear kind of the rest of the particular tracks kind of all playing. But this is my reference track. So what I want to do is we're going to just send it to one of my control rooms. So we want to set up in your studio menu to audio connections, and we'll go to our control room, and let's say one of our buses, I'll just call this reference. Okay. So what I want to do now is to take this particular track, we'll go into our full mix console view, and we'll just kind of navigate here, and I'll go to my racks view here. And let's just go ahead and enable a bunch of stuff. And we'll send one of them to the Q sends. All right, so we want to make sure that our Qs are active. And at this point, I want to take that 24 track mix. Let me just select it here. Okay, or the 24-bit mix. Okay, so what I want to do now is we're going to open this up, and I'm not going to send it out to my stereo out. So I'm going to send it to no bus. And then this particular track, what I'm going to do is in the full mix console view, I'm going to all right, and I'm going to send this to my reference at 0 dB. So I could play in my control room the mixes. So let's say I go to my Q mixes here. So we could have our sources. I listen to my main mix. Now I could listen to Q mix 2. And the only thing that's feeding Q mix 2 will be this 24-bit mix, and I think I still have it muted. So I could switch between my reference track and my track. And this way, this reference track isn't going through the main output. So any bus processing or any processing on my 2 track, it's not affecting this. It's kind of going down an alternate monitoring path. So again, we could have our main mix, and if you're like, okay, someone's like, oh, I want it to sound like, this artist, make it sound like this, you could just come here, take that particular track, route it to the control room, to the Q mix, and then you could just switch back and forth. Between the two of them. And the second part of the question was, if you do a tempo detection of that particular file, all you have to do is, if I wanted to come here, I think this will be, so if we did a tempo detection, again, from the project menu, and we choose tempo detection, I think this will probably be pretty steady. All right, well, it's always interesting that we have our tempo detection here. And at this point, we could, once we have that tempo detection in our file, if the other files are all set to musical mode, where we have these files actually, okay, sorry, hit the wrong button, where these could automatically just. Sorry about that. So at that point, if the other tracks are just placed into musical mode, we can just have that musical mode, all those tracks follow that particular track. So let me see if my computer is going to just check my licenses real quick here. Sometimes some of our VPN stuff can interfere that we have for our corporate. Let's see if I get new window. Maybe we can get this going in. Sorry if you could just bear with me for a second. See. You can see if I reinstall my e-license, or if you could just bear with me. Sorry about that. Sorry about this. Sorry if I could probably restart the Mac, but then I'd lose the Google Hangout here. So if we don't get this, we may call it a little bit early today. We'll see if we get it to cooperate. All right, I'll try starting, see if we get it to cooperate here. If not, we may end the Hangout. Apologize for this. All right, so I think that I would have to restart, which would mean me kind of having to end the Hangout because I can't really join it back on. Um, Sorry, sometimes we have encryption software that our IT department puts on that is conflicts. So I apologize for this. Are you guys up for doing? I was thinking of doing another Hangout perhaps next Tuesday. Uh, if you guys want to do that, we could do that. Um, I'll go through the questions that weren't answered in this one, but we'll see. I'm sorry, it's just misbehaving today. Um, Trying to explain this to our IT department that at times I'll try one last time and just see if it's. So I apologize for this. Um, so if you guys want, I could try doing a reboot. If you, I'll see if I'll try to do a quick reboot and see if we can get it up. If we want to hang out for a couple minutes, we'll try that. So let me just shut down. If you guys hang out, I'm not sure if we'll lose the stream or not, but we'll give it a try. Okay, so I'll leave a comments in the field. All right, so I think we're back. So we'll see. Okay, so we'll continue on. Sorry about that. Okay, so we'll move on from our last question. All right. Okay, so if there's questions, there's only like so many that I had. If people didn't have their questions, um, let's go ahead and if you want to re-ask the questions, I have a list of some other questions, so I apologize for that. Okay. We had some comments, but in the chat, there's some of it that was kind of rolled over. So, okay. Okay. So reading through comments, and there's only so many. So if you didn't have your question answered, if you want to re-ask it, just type it again. So I apologize for that. Okay. Okay. So just okay. So I see a question. Is there any way to put the zoom on mouse wheel and zoom anywhere on the screen? I think if we go to one of the preferences, we can just kind of come over here. I think it is one of the preferences. Let me see if I can find it. All right. Sorry, my son is playing music in the next room. He's in a Billy Squier phase recently. All right, I'll see if I can find it, but I believe it's one of the preferences for zooming with the mouse scroll wheel. I'll see if I could stumble across it. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so going through questions again. Sorry, I lost some questions. Okay, going through comments here. Sorry. Okay, so I see. Hi, Greg. When is the next Cubase 10.5 update coming out? Seems like a long time since from the last one. I think the last one was just in February, so it's less than a month old. Okay, so I see a question. How many tracks is the limit and the quality crashes if there are too many tracks? I see how many tracks is the limit and the quality vanishes if there are too many tracks. No, it doesn't affect the quantity of tracks, doesn't affect the quality. Just the more tracks you have, the kind of, you'll notice that the computer will kind of start to slow down. And but it's not going to affect the quality. You may hear some pops and clicks, and if you do hear pops and clicks with that, if we go to your studio setup, you could try to just in a control panel adjust the buffer size as the project grows. Okay, thanks for seeing a lot of the questions kind of come in again. Okay, so let's what is the best way to back up a project to another drive? So if you actually just kind of come over here and go to your file menu, just go to backup project. And when you do backup project, you could choose a different drive, and that will copy all of the files that are needed for that particular project. So if I just say, we'll choose a new folder, and then you'll get some options like if you had unused files, or you can minimize files. So if you use 10 seconds of a 6-minute recording, you won't back up the 5 minutes and 50 seconds. You could have it automatically remove unused files as well, and then you could just hit OK, and that will back it up for you. Okay. So I see a question about auto align. Let me see if I can go back, scroll up to find that. Okay. Okay, so question, how do you slide content of an event? I can't seem to use it. So let's take a look at a particular file here. And if I have a particular event, you want to make sure that the event is smaller than its container. At that point, you could hold down it's Command Option. It's probably Alt Control on the Windows platform, and then you could slip the contents within the clip here. You could also just adjust the offset. So if you wanted to adjust the beats, you could do it by grid, by measure as well here from the info line. So again, if you hold down Alt Control or Option Command on Mac, you could just kind of slip the events right there. Okay, it says, hi, Greg. I have checked out the templates, and there isn't anything which shows a 5.1 with control room output. Can this be done? Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily have to be from a template. But again, we showed it a bit earlier. Just go to your audio connections and make sure that in the outputs that there is a 5.1 bus. And as we do this, you want to make sure that your control room, that you have a monitor that is set up for your configuration of 5.1. So just because there isn't a template doesn't mean that it's not capable of doing that. Okay, any known issues upgrading from Cubase 6.5 to 10.5? Should I buy a new dongle? Mine is 12 years old. It can't hurt to purchase a new dongle. So, that could definitely wouldn't be a bad investment after 12 years of steady use. So, and it's a small investment to make. So, especially for something that is holding, which could be a pretty significant investment. But no known issues from upgrading. Okay, so what is the fastest way to export individual tracks with all plugins and pannings intact? Thank you. It's probably the render in place functionality. So let me just kind of come here and I will, I'll just revert this quickly. So if I have, let's say, I'll just do for just a little region here, and I'm going to select just a couple of different tracks here. Let's say my piano, a vocal, a string part, and let's say this. And now what I could do is I have the track selected, and then I could go to edit and then go to render in place, and you could go to render settings. And once you do this, you could have it be dry. You could have channel settings, which will include like the mix. That will include the EQ and inserts. The complete signal path will be the inserts and the send effects. And if you wanted to include the master effects, you could do that. So now I'll just say render. And at this point, you could just, there's also other settings where you could mute the tracks, or you could have the tracks disabled, or just remove the tracks. And some of the settings for kind of like what it does afterwards could be dependent on if you have the event selected or the track selected. So once I've done this, we can now just simply have it, we'll just kind of rendering between the left-right locators, and all of the effects will be included. So we'll just get a couple more tracks done here. So you could just leave, come back later. And this is often, I suggest this to people in lieu of kind of people that always ask for a multi-freeze. So at this point, it's just rendered, all of the tracks here as audio, and some of the other options that you have when doing a render in place. You could choose to disable the source tracks, remove them, mute them, keep them intact. There's different file paths or naming configurations that you could do as well. So that's probably the easiest way to, to print all your tracks and just render it as you see fit. Okay, can I nudge milliseconds from the bars and beats format, and can I nudge 1 millisecond without having to zoom in? Okay, so if you wanted to nudge in milliseconds, there is a nudge palette that's available at top. So you may want to right click up here and see the nudge palette. So at this point, you could, if we have an event here, we could just choose to nudge, left or right. And this will be dependent upon the grid settings that you have here. So you could say, I want it to be in seconds, and I wanted this to be 1 millisecond. And now every time that you nudge, it's actually going to move it by 1 millisecond. And there's keyboard shortcuts for all this. So you can see the start position. You could also just simply come in the info line and nudge different elements. And if you hit the period key on your computer keyboard, you could toggle back and forth between your primary and secondary displays. So time formats, and you may see that indicated here. So if I wanted this to be seconds and my primary to be bars and beats, you could hit the period key, and then you could just nudge based on the value. So while it's in bars and beats, you could just come here and say, okay, let's nudge 1 millisecond, or again, just hit the period, and you could move in intervals of bars and beats with clock pulses, or just simply coming here and moving with your mouse scroll wheel or the nudge palette. So that's an easy way. Someone asked, I think it was in maybe some of the questions that we didn't get to, how to get the rewind and fast forward back into transport. I remember that as a question. And now we could just, if you go to the right of the transport, we see kind of an abbreviated set of controls. We could just kind of move that over to the right, and you could see the rewind, fast forward, as well as jump to, next marker or previous marker. So if you think like you're missing some functions in the transport, just where you see these three dots, just kind of move those over, and you could expose more capabilities there. Okay. Thanks for all the questions and everyone's patience. Sorry about my computer acted up. Okay, just reading through comments. Thanks again for everyone's patience. Okay, so seeing discussion about maybe seeing less inserts. Seeing comment, Cubase 11 support multi-touch, play touch piano on screen, Android remote app to record themselves easily. So I'm not sure if the multi-touch stuff, when they generally like to do stuff, they like to make sure that it's for both platforms, and there isn't. I'm not aware of Mac OS and multi-touch support. They obviously see it as something that's coming, but I'm not sure if it'll be kind of a reliable MIDI controller. But the technology is always getting better. Okay, so question: is there a way to see multiple channels open at once? So let's say we have this channel here, and I think if I select, and I'll just put this to always on top. Okay, and there is a keyboard modifier to do that. Let me see. I think it might be tied into a preference that's kind of awkwardly named. I kind of show it in one of my videos. I'm just trying to see if I could find that preference. Sorry, you may hear Led Zeppelin in the background. My 6-year-old son likes them now, and he's home from school. see if I can find a preference. Sorry about this. All right. I'll look through editing one more time. But there is a preference that allows you to do it. So you can see like two. I don't think this is it, but I'll try. I know there's a preference for it. I'll figure it out for the next Hangout. So sorry, I can't find it. Trying to remember which of the tutorial videos I did that has it. But one of it might be. I'm drawing a blank right now, but there's a way to do it. So sorry, I can't remember. Okay. Okay, so you see a question, can you time warp multiple tracks, like 3 microphones on a single guitar to avoid phase issues? Currently, it's not really set up to do that on the multi-track, so you'd have to kind of do each track independently. So hopefully we'll see some changes with that coming soon. Okay. Okay, so we see the rewind and fast forward on a transport. So we talked about that. Okay, so just going through. So see John's statement: you never moved tempo detect points without changing the following and previous tempo detecting points. So maybe if you could expand on that. I know might have been a tempo detection before we had the issue with the computer. Okay, so I see a question. Hey, Greg, here from Pennsylvania. When are we going to be able to do spectral EQ comparison in Nuendo? So one of the new things that we see in Cubase 10.5 is the ability to, take a particular channel and we'll pick one channel and we could have a different channel as kind of a spectral comparison mode. So let's say if we're on our vocal here, and I wanted to see maybe the piano. I can now see kind of the piano EQs. So if I want to come here, I could switch to the piano. And then go back to my vocal. And kind of go back and forth. So if you're not familiar with that feature, that was just introduced in Cubase 10.5. So I think we'll see that probably the next version of Nuendo. So look for that, probably Nuendo 11. I'm not sure when the exact date is for release. I know that they were going to show it, some of the components, for the GDC show that was supposed to be going on this week. So, we may see it in a few months, migrating to Nuendo. So it's a really handy feature. Okay. Okay, so we're just seeing a question about ambisonics. So let me just jump to show some of the ambisonics functions. So if you wanted to come here, I think I have some of the ambisonics. I don't really have a good ambisonics demo, but we can show you some of the concepts. So now when you go to, record a particular file, so let's say if we come here, we could choose to add different types of tracks. So when we go to, and if we wanted to add an audio track, you could choose not only mono, stereo, 5.1, but now you have first, second, and third order ambisonics. And this will allow you to do binaural audio. So, and this is going to allow us to do different head tracking. So as we start off at this point, we could say, okay, let's go to and show you some of the plugins. So we could see kind of the, we could see the ambi converter. So we could have that set up. And there's also, if you wanted to see kind of your head tracking. So if you have like one of the head trackers, kind of like an Oculus, we could have, that set up for doing, your on-screen, and then also kind of your panner. So you could do your height as well as positioning panning. So you could have your audio kind of spin around your head and match with the different head tracking capabilities that you have from your headset. So it's a quick overview of some of the ambisonics stuff. Okay. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to become a Cubase ambassador? They do have a function that you could apply through on the Steinberg website to be like a Steinberg certified trainer, and that could vary depending on the country that you're in. So you could just look at the Steinberg certified trainers and look into that. All right. Okay, so I see a question. Can I set a fixed point duration, but so it doesn't stretch every time I make a recording? Or I'm sorry, can I set a fixed project duration, but so it doesn't stretch every time I make a recording? It's from Jordy Brodo. So if you want to have a fixed project duration, you could do this, in the project setup. So if you wanted to come here, you could see the project duration here. So you could probably start off with a template with a fixed duration. But I'm maybe not understanding but so that it doesn't stretch every time I make a recording part. So, all right. So maybe if you could reiterate the question or ask it in a different way. Sorry if I'm being dense. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Can I discuss the main purpose of the control room? So when using the control room, one of the main aspects is to have an independent monitoring stage of the console. So if we have a project, so say if we are playing back a project like this, we see a lot of people, one of the dilemmas of working in a traditional DAW is sometimes people are often working with powered monitors. And as they work with this, they sometimes treat their monitoring level volume from the master fader of the project. So if we wanted to come over here, we could say, and they use their master out as their monitoring volume. And often we would get people that would crank their speakers up and have their master volume set very low. And that's fine, except for then when you go to export your mix, that this could be very low. So the control room one gives you just a monitoring volume that won't affect the gain structure of the mix. So that's kind of decoupled from the gain structure going on in the mix. And here we could have this setup where we could have known monitoring levels. So we could have a reference. You could also dim the signal so as you're playing. And you could set the amount of dim. It's also set up if you have multiple monitors. You could have 4 different monitor sets, and you could switch between your different monitors. It's also designed to be doing your down mixing. So if you wanted to listen to it in, stereo versus mono, we could do this. So let's go back to make sure I have the right monitor. And within a control room, we could also have all of your cue mixes handled as well. So if you're doing headphone mixes for different musicians as they're tracking. So those are some of the main design intentions of the control room. So it's very powerful once you kind of get used to it. And it's something a lot of programs kind of ignore, which is a very reason why a lot of other programs, people still tend to use consoles for a lot of different elements, but you could just do so much of it here. And I go into a lot of facilities where I see people have a digital mixer, like maybe an older Yamaha, and it's set up for a talkback mic. It's set up for a volume monitoring control, and that could all be done very easily in software with the control room. So, okay, we're going through some more questions. Thanks again for questions and everyone's patience. Okay. I can't get some of my 32-bit VST instruments working on Cubase 10.5, even with JBridge. How frustrating. I understand the frustration, but, you could also, many of the 32-bit plugins, we've been supporting 64-bit since version 4, and, they do cause system instabilities, and, I understand that, maybe you use the use of plugins, and it's a comfort factor and it's particular sounds that you're used to, but it's just about all the companies are migrating to a 64-bit, and if it's the frustration, you should maybe echo to the plugin developer and see if they have a 64-bit version. It's just kind of the reality of the situation. Like Mac OS won't even run 32-bit stuff anymore with Catalina. So, it's just much more, the trade-off you'll make is for great system stability. Okay, so it says I bought Cubase Element and internal and it should be with Groove Agent SE, but it's not. How do I get it? You should have the Groove Agent SE. I'm almost positive comes with Groove Agent. Sometimes people miss it when they go to add a track, because it could be under drum category. If you don't see it, just you can make sure that you have the full installation and try running the installation again. But I'm almost positive it's part of Cubase Elements. So try running the full installation. So sometimes I know people will not get the full download of all the content because it could be pretty big because there's a lot of content that comes with Cubase. So Okay, so seeing a question, is there another way to record in Cubase without having to use the input monitoring button, without turning it on and then turning it off to listen to what was recorded in that channel? If we go to your preferences and under VST, set the auto monitoring type to tape machine style. So, and I'm trying to get that as the default behavior. It defaults to manual. Try setting that to tape machine style, and I think that will switch the behavior for how you want it to work. That's how I find everyone kind of migrates to there and never leaves it. Okay, so we have a question. Can I explain 64-bit precision in the audio settings? So when we have, previous versions of Cubase were always well known for having a 32-bit floating point mix engine. And we could kind of set this up, like when we go to our VST audio systems. And that was fine because we could capture 24-bit audio. And if you capture 24-bit audio and you introduce new information into the stream, that information has to be accommodated for. So the engine was originally designed for 32-bit floating point, so that we could incorporate all of the extra information brought by the processing and effects and EQs and reverbs, to have all that incorporated without kind of degrading the original 24-bit audio file. And recently with Cubase 10, we went to the capability of recording 32-bit integer, because like the new URC interfaces and the AXR4U and AXR4T offer 32-bit A to D conversion. So that's an actual 32-bit word that's written. So it's kind of a unique aspect, and it does make a difference in the recording. Now, as you do this, you need to have the processing higher than the precision of, or higher than the actual, word length of the captured audio sample to really accommodate other information such as the mix engine functions. So that's why we have the 64-bit precision. And I have kind of a friend of mine, Greg Lukens, who's kind of very highly regarded in the audio industry. He's a blind mastering engineer, and has just probably the best ears that I've ever met on anyone. I'm lucky I know him. And when it first came out with the 64-bit floating point precision, I sent him two files. One that was sent with mixed down to the same exact settings in 32-bit floating point, and then I did the same file and switched it to 64-bit floating point precision. And I just asked him, it's like, here's two files. Tell me what you think. And he's just like, well, this one file sounds a little better. I'm not sure why, but it's a little better. And that was the 64-bit floating point precision file. So that's so Greg will always kind of serve as my a blind listening test, someone who has amazing ears. So he was able to kind of determine the difference. So it just allows you, especially when working with 32-bit word, 32-bit integer files that are now being captured, to have that processing not affect the integrity of the original 32-bit audio sample signal. So I see a question, says VST3 64-bit. I'm not sure what the question is. So VST3 can be 32-bit or 64-bit. They could be 32-bit or 64-bit precision for processing as well. Okay, so question, how can we do polyphonic mode voicing on drum staff? I may not have a good file for that, but if we go into a particular file, let's go into the score editor, and if we wanted to do kind of polyphonic voicings for drums, I think where you would find it, so as soon as you come here, go to the staff settings, and we could just double click here to get that. Go to the staff and select polyphonic in the staff mode. Set this to polyphonic here, and then you should see the stem directions for your drum notation. So give that a shot, and I think that will do the trick. Okay. What is the best process for opening an AAF in Cubase 10.5? There's no real best process, but it's just importing and selecting the AAF file. So it's a pretty seamless transfer format to get files in and out of different programs with more data, more information attached to it. Okay, so is it possible in Score Editor to move trim notes to the left or right with mouse wheel Windows or swipe left right Mac? I don't know if it's possible to trim the rhythmic. Just make sure I'm reading it correctly. So let's go back to our Score Editor here. And there's one of the new preferences. Let me just see if it's over in here. One of the new preferences was just using the mouse wheel to transpose notes. I don't think this is what you wanted to do, but now if you come here, you could just transpose using the mouse. I think that was implemented in 10.5. So, once you're here, though, you could adjust the length of particular notes in the info line. So if I wanted to come here, let me just see if we can. Let me change that preference back. All right, so let's say if I take this particular note and I just so you can probably adjust it here, but it's not really set up to kind of change rhythmically, but you could adjust the length, and this may be kind of quantized on the display. So I don't know of a way to do that. There may be a way, but not one that's kind of jumping out to me. Okay, so we had another question about the spectral comparison. So that will probably be coming. Okay, so we see a question on timecode slaving to IAC driver not working. My master is Finale notation software. Can you show how to set it up in Cubase? Let me see if I have my IAC driver. I don't have Finale. And sometimes the IAC is kind of a really old and a bit of a flaky driver I found. So let me just add a MIDI track and see if I have my IAC installed. Okay, so let me see if I can activate it here. Okay, so let me just. I'm not sure if it's showing, but it should, anything that is receiving time code, you should see, just going to the transport and going into the project synchronization setup. So I assume you're sending MIDI time code from that. So, you could, see from your destinations, like you could see, where MIDI time code is coming in from. So you could see make sure that you see the IAC driver here. It probably makes sense to make sure you have the same frame rate. So you may want to check the auto detect frame rate. Out of curiosity, sometimes I've found IAC not to be reliable. But you could also just set a MIDI track with the IAC as the input and put the MIDI monitor plugin as a MIDI insert. And at that point, you could see if it's actually spitting out the right data for you. Part of the IAC that was done originally for OS X when it came out, like 10, around 10.15, and I don't think it's changed or really been revisited ever since then. So it may not be the best method of doing that. So even if you have other, if there's, a MIDI interface that you can go between two, that might be more reliable. And you could also, many people just, export music XML if you're getting files, but I understand if you're kind of have that working kind of in sync. So. Okay, so we have surround panner question. All right, let me just. All right, sorry, got my mouse jumped ahead here. All right, so just reading through comments. Sorry for silence here. Okay, just reading through comments. Sorry. Thanks everyone for great questions. Sorry we had a little issue with the crash and my Mac not cooperating. Okay, sorry, just my mouse jumped way ahead, so I'm just going through comments. Okay, so surround panner question. Which button in the surround panner correlates 100% with standard stereo? So let's go ahead and we'll create a 5.1 track. Okay, so I have one. So I'll add an audio track. Okay, so when we're in our surround panner, so which location in the surround panner correlates 100% with standard stereo? So if you wanted to do that, you could just simply, hold down, you could bypass, so you see the front channels here, and you could adjust the center, down to 0. I'm trying to think of if it's, trying to remember, I think it was if you Alt or Shift, you could sometimes bypass. Now, another question I thought I saw kind of come across when working in stereo is this concept of child buses, like having a stereo reference or stereo bus within the surround. Like if you wanted to have something fixed in the surround speakers or fixed in the front. So if you go to your audio connections here, and this may make sense for this question as well, you could right click and add a child bus. So you can say I wanted a stereo child bus. And then this could be like, left and right. Or you could add another child bus, which would be your surrounds. So, and that way within a particular 5.1 channel, you could also just send it out to your stereo out within a 5.1 channel. So if you want to do true, stereo within your surround, that's how you could do it. Okay, question. Is it possible to have toolbars to resize with to adjust with Windows resize? I'm using dual monitor. When I resize to one monitor, many tools get hidden. Currently not, and I'm not sure if there would be a good way to automatically do that. You may want to, I don't know if you've tried working with workspaces, if that would make a difference. I'm not sure if it would do the trick for you. But it's hard to go from single to dual screen and have everything kind of adjust and see everything as it was. So it says, hi, Greg, please, how to access to Simple I've just bought. I think this is Chris St. Aubyn's synth, which I just started playing with. I don't have it installed yet here. But it would show up within Halion or Halion Sonic SE or Halion Sonic. So if we have one of those, we could just kind of open up. So I'll click here, and I have a Halion in this project. So when you go to load, you should see the Simple show up directly in here as kind of like the family library. If you're doing it within Halion Sonic SE3, which comes with Cubase, so it's probably an instrument that works within Halion Sonic SE3. So if I want to add an instrument track as opposed to just a dedicated standalone, so if I go to my Halion Sonic SE3, any of the other libraries that you have, when you click on instrument sets, you should see it show up directly here. So I think that's where you would see the Simple. So I think it sounds fabulous. It's been great watching Chris kind of work on that for a long time, and kudos to him for coming out with such a great product. All right. So we have, can someone tell me how to add the rewind and forward icons to transport? It only shows stop. Okay, so I think we covered that, but I know we're delayed. So again, just kind of go to the right of what you see here and just hold down the left mouse button and drag it over to the right. Okay. So again, this is kind of going back to the project duration. So can I set a fixed project duration so that it doesn't stretch every time I make a recording? So if you want it to automatically stop at the end of stop recording at the end of a duration, like you want to record exactly 30 minutes for a show or something like that, just set the right locator where you want it to go. And maybe you could just hit O, and you could activate punch out. It doesn't necessarily, so you could set like your punch out point. So I'm not sure, maybe if you give kind of more of a use case for that, that would be helpful. And see if that, if I'm misunderstanding, let me know. Okay. So we're saying, is it possible to quantize the length of multiple segments in Very Audio? I don't think so, because it's going to be kind of a per, a per part. Let me just come here to the Very Audio for each segment. So I will just kind of just get to my Very Audio here. We'll kind of blow it up here again. So just make sure I'm reading this right. So I think it's going to be just the length will be for the last. So I guess you'd want to be able to select multiple events and be able to kind of stretch like that. I can see the use case in that. I'll pass that on. Yeah, I can see where that could be useful, but currently I don't know of a way to do that. Let me try a modifier key just on the odd chance. But I think it's going to do, so even holding down shift, it's going to do on this selected. I haven't had a need to do that, but I could see where that could make sense. So let me know if I misunderstood. Okay, question. When exporting video, is it possible to change the default encoder format? So currently, this is the first implementation of the export video. So it's going to be kind of these settings. I think we'll see more coming in the future with some more options and different sample rates. But they wanted to make sure that they had the functionality. So currently it's kind of fixed as is. So, okay. So I see a question. Can we colorize input tracks? So let me just do a new project here. So I don't know I assume we're talking about these input channels. I mean, we don't generally see them other than on the mix console here. So, I don't know, since it's not generally a part. Let me just add a couple audio tracks and see. Yeah, so I don't know a way to colorize the input channels since they generally don't show up in the project window. That could be some of the reasoning. But let me know if I misunderstood that. But I don't see a way of doing it currently. But I understand kind of why it may be set up that way. Okay, so we kind of discussed the audio warping. So it's not really currently available. Okay, so all right, so let's go back. John's question about tempo. Okay. So it says, would you please show us how to move tempo warp points without affecting adjacent points? So I think, and sorry if I'm misunderstanding, John. Let me just get something a little more realistic in my tempo change here. Okay, so if I All right, so as we adjust, like, this particular tempo here, I think what John may be talking about is seeing. So as we do this, that we can see the bar line adjusting. So something to play around with, which may do the trick on this. Like if we go to our tempo editor, and I could read up on this, but there is a process bars and the process tempo function that may help with this. But I could play around with that. But I assume you mean that as you adjust tempo, that you'll see the changes affect the tempo, which makes sense. I'm not sure if maybe we do delete that time if that's helpful. But check out those two other functions, and I could play around with it a little more. Okay, so I see rest in peace jogging. Is that in reference to the jog wheel that isn't on a transport anymore? So the functions are still, available in key commands. So if you have a hardware piece, you could do that or use key commands. Okay. Let's see. A comment is, as a user of A multi-touch tablet on my Mac, I could tell you that it is possible. I've also heard gestures at a time with Photoshop would be great in Cubase. Okay, so that's probably referring back to the multi-touch, but it may not be multi-touch from the screen, so that could be different. Okay, so comment, I can say that a lot of the new VST effect programs only work with Cubase 10 or better now, so upgrade is essential to use effect upgrades too. Okay, question. Is it possible to monitor MIDI signal message in Cubase in real time, Dodon sysx messages? So if you have a MIDI track, if you go to the MIDI inserts, there's a MIDI monitor plugin. And now as you hit anything, move a knob, a controller, you can see whatever it is. If you don't see sysx showing up and you're transmitting sysx, try going to your preferences and under MIDI filter, uncheck sysx. But just use the MIDI monitor plugin and that should do the trick. Okay, question. Is it possible to set a keyboard shortcut or for add chord in Chord Assistant? Okay, we'll take a look. Look at our key commands. I don't see a particular key command. Let me just reread it, make sure I'm understanding it right. All right, so let me just open up chord track. Yeah, I don't know a keyboard shortcut, but I'll add that to my list that I kind of keep a running list of missing keyboard shortcuts, but I don't know a way to do it now. Okay, how can I synchronize Cubase with external sequencer in order to record the songs from the synthesizer into my computer? So what you want to do is make sure that the other device, the other synthesizer or sequencer, is set to look for MIDI clock. Go to your transport menu here. We'll go to your project synchronization setup, and we could see we want to set it to MIDI timecode. And then under destinations, we want to have the port, and we could just have it under MIDI timecode destinations, where this particular port is sending out and connected directly to the sequencer. So once that will simply, that when you hit play in Cubase, it'll send MIDI timecode out to that port, and that should automatically synchronize back. And you may need a MIDI cable. I haven't done this in forever, but you may need a MIDI cable out or using the USB connection if it's a USB enabled synthesizer, and to set the MIDI input to record directly back into Cubase. And then as you do this, you want to make sure that the external sync is enabled. So once you're here on the transport, or you could just say activate external sync, which, and then we hit play, the two should be locked together. Okay, so seeing, same question about asking, like taking multiple guitar mics and being able to edit. One technique that you might want to try, and this may have been mentioned before, is using the auto align. So if you have like multiple tracks here, and this is kind of a different paradigm, but just to kind of show you what you could do. And this may do the trick if you have multiple guitar parts you're trying to clean up. Let's say if we have vocals. Okay, so at this point, what you could do is select one of the particular tracks, and then you can say this, go to the auto align function, set that as a reference, and now you could set the other tracks here. Let me just select. So I'll say we'll take these particular tracks as targets, and as we do this, we'll align the audio, and that will kind of warp them together. So you could line up tracks that way, kind of using the auto line. So, instead of like warping between the two, you could, try the auto line and see if that does the trick. That would probably help. All right, good to see Stanley online. All right. Okay. Okay, so a question from Paul. Greetings. Earlier in the channel edit, the signal output was indicated where it goes, which group. Now they are written in targets. Now I need to open up and watch the entire path. All right, so let's take a look. Let's say I'll send these to a group quickly here. Okay, so if I'm here, okay, so right now you see it going to two targets as opposed to which particular target. Yeah, and then so something that may help with you if you actually just kind of come here to the output chain. So I could take this particular track as going to a group. The group is going to the master out. Is that you could just kind of show all of them at once. And let me see if that's available as kind of a keyboard shortcut. So, well, I understand it may show two different targets, but this would physically show it. And let's just see if that's available as a key command. Yeah, so you could actually in the channel settings just do a show hide output chain. It may not be ideal, but you could just simply click there to see the output chain and then just select whatever stage you want to be in. So, but I understand that could be a little irritating. Okay, so question: how are Steinberg and Yamaha associated? Which company trumps the other when DAW upgrades are concerned? Thanks, Greg. Yamaha owns a number of different companies in the in different markets. Yamaha owns Ampeg bass amps, Line 6, Bosendorfer pianos, and Steinberg. Generally, they allow Steinberg to do their own development, and they let Line 6 do their own development, because they have expertise, and that's why they kind of acquired those companies. So I don't think one trumps the other, and we're always kind of working together to make sure that the hardware makes sense and ties into the software, and so that there's really good levels of integration, and everyone could be set in their different areas of expertise. So Yamaha is the parent company, and again, they own many other companies, Nexo speakers, Line 6, Ampeg, Steinberg. Okay, going through. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to sidechain Isotope, Neutron, and Cubase? I don't have Neutron installed on this, but any plugin that has sidechain capability you could work with. So and just to set up a sidechain, one of the things that's been kind of simplified, especially in version 10. Let me just so if you have a particular track, would be how it would work, and if it doesn't work, it's a limitation of the plugin itself. But once you open up the plugin on the channel, so I have this as an insert, I could click here to activate a side chain, and at this point we could just select which channel is the sidechain input, and that's all you'd have to do. So if you don't see that option, it's just not available in the Neutron plugin, but that's how sidechaining works inside of Cubase. Okay, question from Zach. Good to see you online, Zach. You used to work for us, I believe, if it's the same Zach Krikorian. Okay, when editing master volume automation on the arrange screen, the nodes go away, and only way to see them is to draw a selection box when they show up. So let me just get a project here. Okay, so I'll just do a quick go to the end of the song and do my horrible fade out. And one little tip that some people miss, like if you don't want to constantly go back and forth between, like, to go to your master fader and to a channel, if you wanted to fix a particular channel, if we could do this in the main mix console or in the mix console here. We could go to under visibility, and then if you click on zones, I could take my stereo out, and I could just fix it to the right zone. So as it would scroll left and right, at this point, you could just have that automatically fixed there. So let's say I'll play along here. So let's say I just wanted to do my fade out here. Okay, so I've now written my horrible fade out. Okay, so here's my fade out, and I'm just going to reread Zach's question. It says, when editing master volume automation on your range screen, the nodes go away, and the only way to see them is to draw a selection box, and they show up. If you just kind of hover in the region, it's kind of a software design aspect, because sometimes they, if we come here, let's say if we have, a fade out, let's just say I hit my automation and I have like my fade here, that you may not see it until you kind of hover over it. So we may have the fade out, but sometimes if you have like a zillion dots that are kind of always not relevant to what's going on, so sometimes they're kind of hidden until you're kind of in that zone to show you. So it's not a constant eyesore. So I'm just going to make sure I'm rereading that. So you see no nodes, and then when you hover, you don't have to necessarily draw a selection box, but just hover to see them. So let me know if I'm misunderstanding that, Zach. And you could just comment a little bit later. Okay, so I see a comment, and this for U.S. customers. USB dongle that Cubase uses is on sale at Sweetwater Sound. I just ordered a backup. It's a good thing to have, so it's good that they have a lot of stock in case there's any supply disruptions or anything with current coronavirus situation. Okay, will there ever be any upgrades for VST amp? I haven't heard of any, but they usually will tweak plugins periodically. But I'll pass that on. If there's any particular features you'd like to see in the VST amp, let us know. It's kind of a hidden gem for a lot of people. I know many people. Okay, so I think someone may be helping me out in my memory lapse. In edit channel top right, let's see if we can. It's about having two channel editors open at once. Let me see if I thought it was a preference. Let me just see if I can figure this out from someone's kind comment. Okay. Yeah. So thank you for that tip. So if you go directly here, you could say uncheck the follow E buttons, and then you could have multiple channel strips open simultaneously. All right. Thank you, Milan. No, I'm sorry. It was Ali Azer. I probably pronounced your name wrong and butchered it, but thank you for reminding me. How to find pitch and key of any samples in 10.5. It won't necessarily do keys, and you can't really, it's hard to tell a key from a particular sample. But if you have a sample, what a lot of people do is, let's say if we want to look at our loops and samples, let's say, so let's say if we drag in a particular audio file here, what a lot of people do when they're doing like pitch detection of samples is just to double click, and we'll take it into the Very Audio editor, and it could do the pitch determination right there. So we can say B0. So that's one way of finding it. But a key is going to be could be like for not necessarily so a key is related to multiple chords within a pattern of a song. So it's not going to do a key, and I probably wouldn't trust anything that really did from one sample. Okay. It says, I'm a guitar player and I have to go to third party like Guitar Rigs to get what I'm looking for. Yeah, so if you give more details, I'd be happy to kind of pass it on. Okay. Okay, question. What is the criteria for choosing Nuendo over Cubase or vice versa? I would say if you're doing music production, Cubase would, definitely cover all your needs. If it works for like, Hans Zimmer for, his projects, it would probably cover most of us. It's where Nuendo really excels at is if you need to do Dolby Atmos work, if you need to do, if you're doing more game audio production, working with game audio middleware like Audio Kinetic Wise, if you're getting into more capabilities for dialogue recording, ADR functionality. If you're doing Foley work, there's some more sound design aspects. You have some plugins like Doppler, randomizer. So we see people doing games, post production, stuff like that, and they still have all the Cubase music features depending on which versions, where the version synchronicity is at that particular point in time. But if you're doing music, I think you could do everything in Cubase without any worries. Okay, is there a better way to fix the tempo of audio recorded rubato? I record a MIDI click, remove the MIDI notes that are not hit point in the target audio and render as audio, then the audio alignment. You can just, if you have tempos, and this kind of, once you have a tempo map done for an audio file, so say I just have an audio file and I have a tempo map. All right, and let's say this is the tempo map that's been extracted directly from the file. What you could do is, like, let's say if we did a tempo detection on the audio, if you go to the audio menu and go to advanced, you could say, sorry, it's annoying when I lose my mouse. And you could say set definition from tempo. And once we have a rubato piece of music and we have its tempo kind of extracted, we could say set definition from tempo. Then that will basically embed all the tempo changes within the metadata of the audio file itself. So you could drop it into any other project, and it will and once it is set to musical mode, which you could do directly from the events right here. Once it's set to musical mode, those files will automatically conform to different tempos. So give that a try. And I have several tutorials on kind of audio warping between non-matching tracks on, if you go to the Cubase Q&A section on the videos, so check those out. But you could definitely do it without having to take, the MIDI and do rendering like you describe. Okay, so going through comments. Thanks everyone for great questions and patience in hanging out before they hang out. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, I watched one of your videos about the chord track. It looked like you could control multiple instruments which are playing individual MIDI melodies with it. How did I set this up?" So once we have a chord track, so I'll just quickly add. Okay, so let's say I have this. Then I'll just add some MIDI tracks here. All right, and I'm going to just move these down. And I'll just copy these particular. Okay, so right now I have all these different parts that are following the, extracted from the chords. But let's say if I come here, if you go to the chords, we could have all of these choose to follow the chord tracks or the chords in scale. So we could say follow directly. So now as I change, and I'll just blow these up. So you could do, and you could select that for multiple parts. It's one of the unique inspector aspects that can work for multiple parts. So now as I change this particular chord, let's say to, let's see if I can move this. So I'll come here and let's say I change this chord to a G chord. Those will all change. So let's say if I move it to a C chord, all these MIDI notes will change and follow. So you just select the event, and under the chord part in the inspector, just choose to follow chord track and choose chords. You could also choose chords and scales, or if it's like a bass, just root notes. And then those will automatically kind of become like almost like a harmonic parasite, if you will. So if I switch it to an F chord, all these notes, the MIDI notes themselves will move. So it's just, I'll select just this and we could see the notes kind of change accordingly here. So if we watch in the lower zone editor, I move it to a G chord, you see the notes shift, and move it to an A chord, the notes will shift. So, and you can do that for melodies, for chords, whatever you want to have it work with. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, what is the best way to do a template for multi-recording?" So, if you're doing this, what I like to do, like for a multi-track, so maybe like a concert or like a live tracking scenario, is as we come over here, let's say we do a new project. I've done lots of big concert recordings. So let's say I wanted to come here. I wanted 48 mono tracks. Okay. One of the things that I like to do, is let's select all of these at once. Come here, and then I like to move these to a folder track. And so I'll just say move selected tracks to a folder track, because what I could do is actually, take the folder and I could record and monitor enable once in the folder, and all those changes will automatically carry over. If you're naming tracks, one tip is you can name the tracks and hit the tab key, and that will take you to the next tracks field. And that way you can name just looking at the track list. When you do new projects, it's always good to, by default, Cubase will try to put you into a default location so that each project could be set up independently. But if you come here, you could just choose prompt for project location. Then when you go to create, it'll ask you for the folder where all the audio files will be stored. So that's some of the things that I do quickly. I like to also see, all of my inputs. So if you have like one of the problems gets to be inevitably, like if someone does a sound check, their levels are, you're like, okay, that's the loudest that you're going to play. And they're like, yeah, that's the absolute loudest. And, as momentum kicks in, all the volumes tend to creep up, from the stage and from the stage to front of house, and there's more energy. So at times you may want to take all of your input channels. Like I remember doing this when I was recording the Eric Clapton's Crossroads Festival. And all the volumes tended to creep up a little bit as the day goes on, and the engineer's ears are a little tired. But we could just take all the inputs, and as it was starting to creep up on the input channels, I could just, between a song, just nudge, these values down just a little bit to make sure that we weren't going to be clipping. So those are a couple things I would set up as a template. And then once you have those things configured for, inputs and outputs and your routing, just choose to, when you come here, you could just choose to save as template, and you say 48 track record in, and then, you could be up and recording in a few mouse clicks. Let's see, a technique. Question is, what about shows a technique in Groove Agent? Anything unusual? In the full version of Groove Agent SE, one thing that I really like that a lot of people miss and a lot of times when you get a particular project, you can, just as you're kind of playing along, let's say, hit the E key to go back and forth between pattern and instrument. So, let's say I've spent a lot of time setting up my mixer with effects. So like more reverb, and I select my snare and I wanted to apply more EQ. One of the things that's really helpful, I find, is like if you could do a tremendous amount because you have different, aux sends and reverbs and effects within here. But once you're in the mixer, you could also just right click and say, export the mixer and effects to the Cubase channel. And that will automatically translate all the effects that you've done directly into the Cubase mixer. That's super helpful. So some other things. So that's with, I think you do that with both of them. I like being able to take let me jump back to a different project. Drummers are always like really, very used to doing sound checks where, they may have a lot of, hit your kick drum for a couple minutes, which is always a great time to work on like sampling sessions. So if I have a project here and let's say I have a Groove Agent kit and I wanted to make my own sound, you could just take like multiple segments with the range selection tool and drag it over to a pad. And at this point, you could now choose to layer the particular sound. So if you want to take all three of the, samples, you could just, come directly here and trigger samples. So dragging and dropping. The full Groove Agent is also, fantastic for doing drum sampling. So there's a lot of stuff you could do with that as well. So those are some handy little Groove Agent tips. I'll just close out that project. All right, so we'll move on. Okay, so a comment or a question: it would be cool to have a MIDI grid offset too. The chord tracks, chords are usually too late for coloring the audio events correctly. One question that someone had asked, I'll get back to that, is someone wanted to know, like, how to get the chord track on upbeat. They're having a hard time figuring out how to get it not to be on a downbeat. So if while I'm here, before I forget, we could just go to our chord track and, depending on your level of zoom and your snap. So here, usually by default, you snap to bar. So if I wanted to drop in a chord track event, it would only go to bar and nowhere in between. But we could also choose to have this snap to a beat. So if I want to put chords on every beat, or we could do even to quantize the value of a 16th note. So, if you wanted to come here and have different chords. So you could do that very easily. So that was probably a question someone had asked previously that I just remembered. So let me just reread this point. So it'd be cool to have a MIDI grid offset to the chord tracks. The chords are usually too late for coloring the audio events correctly. So it's kind of in response to another question. So, all right. So reading through comments. Okay, question: is there a way to make the track edit window smaller? So let's take a look. So you can kind of, pick different elements. There are some resizing things, and sometimes that can get into some weird graphic issues, but you could choose to kind of, right click on different settings here. Let me just... sometimes, there were some ways of resizing it, and I think sometimes that could get into some weird graphic anomalies that people in earlier versions had run. So let me just see. So there are some, other functions that you could turn on, but you probably want it smaller. And let me just check, see. It used to be you could kind of grab by the edges and kind of stretch it out, but that again would cause some issues. So I think it might be kind of set in size to get all the information, especially with using channel strips. So it's all kind of legible enough. And, I could see where if you have, like I'm running at 1920 by 1080p or 1920 by 1080 resolution, and that could be problematic. If you're running something like a smaller resolution on your computer, that could be an issue, or it could be too big. So, but it might be better to try to get your monitor resolution up a little bit. But I think it's kind of a fairly fixed thing at this point. So, okay, we'll keep scrolling here. Okay, can you please let me know how can I fix Cubase 10.5 to not make CPU overload spikes? For example, same project on same computer at 10.05 works perfect. On 10.5.12, CPU spikes to 100%. Make sure, there's some, even though it's the same project, there could be some differences in settings. Make sure that I assume that you've gone through and set the buffer the same, but some other things that may not be as obvious. Check your ASIO guard settings. Check all these settings here in the VST audio system to see, make sure that the floating precision, the processing precision is the same. The ASIO guard, the multi-processing is active as well. I haven't noticed any huge differences. I've seen some people, like when using the multi-tap delay, using it multiple times, can get some CPU high usage. And sometimes that's dealing with, because they're running 15 different plugins within the multi-tap delay. So then that's kind of understandable. But, check to make sure, again, everything is set the same exact way. And also, if you could let us know kind of, what operating system you're on. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. Thanks everyone for great questions. All right. We'll go a little bit longer since we had some interruptions here. Okay, so a question on is there a setting to make the cursor not always jump to the beginning of a clip? Sometimes I need to have the cursor stay where I put it in the middle of a clip. So let me just jump to a quick project here. Okay, so if you hold down, so you can see that, but if you hold down the Option Shift and click, wherever you click, the cursor will be positioned. So wherever you click with the mouse. So otherwise, it'll go to the beginning of that clip. So as soon as I select it, but if you hold down Option and Shift, Alt Shift, that it'll jump to exactly where you click it. So try that. Okay, so we had a question about, setting up a courtesy reverb for the performer. So if we add a track, we can add an audio track. At this point, we could, set this up. And when we do the audio track, make sure that you're not set up for direct monitoring on your audio interface, and that you just have a a reverb. You could do it as an insert. If you do it as an insert, try to adjust your mix level there so that won't be recorded. If you put it on an input channel, the reverb will be recorded, but this will just be monitored through that. So that's how you can set up a courtesy reverb. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible to have the Very Audio editor in the lower zone? So yes, we could just come here, and when you double click on an audio event, we could go to the Edit Very Audio. It could do its analysis, and we could see it in the lower zone here. And the second part to the question was, is it possible to create chord tracks from within the MIDI? So the Very Audio is monophonic currently. So I've seen very sketchy results and stuff that's doing chords properly. So currently it's for monophonic, so it's not going to be really set up to do the chords automatically. Okay, it says, Greg, I have RME, UFX, Fireface, and a total mix allows me to do many of the things of the control room. Can I still benefit from the control room? Where can I learn more about control room? We do have some control room tutorials, but the thing with the control room is it's saved with the project and it's not decoupled from the project. So it's not a separate thing. So that's where the big benefit is. And especially if you're doing, you could do headphone mix routing, but, being able to, take the current mix levels and pan settings from Cubase and set that and then recall that, when you open up the project, have the Q mixes exactly as they were 2 weeks previously. I don't think you're able to do just from opening up your Cubase project using Total Mix. How do I record the master out if you have an artist? So, if you need to do a real-time recording, a lot of people I know will set up systems where everything is kind of set to a group, and then they treat kind of the group as a master. So if I wanted to come here, I could select, all the tracks in my mix console. And we could add a group channel to the selected tracks, stereo. All right. And then once we have that group channel, if you wanted to, you could just add a stereo audio track. And then at this point, we'll say, the input for this track is coming from groups. So that way you can kind of create. And that was another question we had from the previous Hangout is, will I lose quality doing that? No, it's only going to affect the quality if you change the gain structure or add plugins. Okay. Okay, so it says, hello, Greg. I have individual sounds from a vintage sound machine that no longer displays tempo. How can I record all the tracks using mono output into Cubase 10.5 to match my Cubase's tempo? So once you have the files in your Cubase, go to your project menu and do a tempo detection. Once that tempo detection has been set, select all the files and go to your audio to advanced and say, let's do set definition from tempo, and then whatever tempo you have, all of those files will now match the tempo. That will basically embed all of the tempo changes as metadata within the audio files. Then it will match whatever your tempo is set to in Cubase. Okay, question, is there a way to move the tracks in the mix window? Currently, they're kind of fixed. So we can move it on the project window here. So as I would select a particular track here, we could move it and see those changes reflected. So it's not, a huge deal, but I understand if you're working in a full mix view. So. Okay, we'll answer one or two more questions. I thank everyone for their patience and for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so I think I see a question. Thank you, Greg. What is on PC? I think it's going to be Alt Shift, if that's for the placing the cursor. Okay, so I see a question. Okay, just going through a couple comments. Okay, so I see, is it possible to have Cubase to have the event names follow chord names when you drag a chord track and change the chords later? The drop MIDI events don't change. Well, it makes sense the way it is. So I don't think it's going to automatically update the chord name based on edits that you do. So I see a question, is Absolute going on sale soon? I haven't heard of any upcoming sales for that. Okay, so question, how can you rewrite your CPR project file when it's mistakenly tampered with, especially when they have a ransomware which rewrite type project files? Yeah, I'm not sure if I could help with that. You may have to deal with it if you have ransomware on that end. Okay, is it possible to insert from Groove Agent 5 the trigger notes of patterns to Cubase track, having the Groove Agent inserted as an output? So if you have a Groove Agent track, you could trigger any patterns just by using the appropriate MIDI notes. And when you open up Groove Agent, you'll see kind of the whole kit here, and you'll see the MIDI notes, which will trigger the different patterns. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I know we didn't get to everyone's question, but we've been going for a while, and my son's been incredibly patient, not banging on the doors. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. We've been going about 3 hours or so. So sorry for the computer misbehaving in the middle of the Hangout. I'd like to thank everyone for participating in a Hangout. Thanks for the great questions. We'll try to circle back in the next Hangout and get some more questions. We know that a lot of people are home, So let me know if next Tuesday in the comments field, if next Tuesday would be a good day if you wanted to do another hangout. Realize that there's a lot of people at home. And if you want to, send comments or questions in advance, you could put it into the comments of the field. But I hope that everyone's learned a couple tips and tricks, and that everyone stays safe and healthy in our current climate. So we'll see you on the next hangout. And I'm seeing what about Wednesday? We may try to stick to like a Tuesday, Friday. So, but we could, if you send your questions in advance, you could watch it on Wednesday. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks.